Stranger Things fans, Board now back with you. On this video I will be talking about Stranger Things for Chapter 8. The episode is called Popper or Papa, so full spoilers from the start of this review. Yes, Stranger Things is back for the final 2 episodes that make up Volume 2. And it definitely feels like a two-parter. Like, this feels like a big setup, like it's really laying the groundwork for what's going to be the big battle at the end of the season. One of the things this show does so well is setting the table for these big dramatic, like epic finales. The 3 scenes that stand out maybe as being like real spectacular standouts, but generally speaking it's just a really solid, enjoyable, character-driven episode. There's lots of like fun little character beats in it. There's some good action type scenes. There are some tense moments in it. Feature-length episodes to end the season, which does feel pretty appropriate. Natalia Dyer does her best acting yet on the show. In this episode, there's more than one scene where she really shines, but the opening scene is a good example of this, where she's always been solid for me in the show, but this episode really gives her like a real chance to shine on her own, because she's obviously under the furor of Vecna. And what I like about this opening to the episode is that it sort of seamlessly continues on from the end of episode 7, if you like. There's continuity there where it doesn't feel too broken up. Flashbacks from 1979, so it's the continuation of that story and what ultimately happened to Henry / number 1 / Vecna, which is a gag made later on by Robin. What do we call this person? But that sort of continues on. We see that 11 passed out after what went down with him. Stancy is still watching all this. Brenna appears to her and he's giving like injections to number 1 of Brenna in the past. Suddenly is infected by Vecna, where he assumes the voice. He turns towards her. You've got the eyes going. And yeah, it's almost like the Freddy Krueger style voice where he says very monotonically, "Nancy, you can't go yet. I've more for you to see, Nancy." And what we find out in this section of the episode is Nancy is gripped into this chair, like she's put in the chair, like tentacles are like holding her in position. It's all very quite gross and you know, slimy and tense. His plan is for the present. So he inserts like visions into her, and it's visions of what's to come in the future. And his message to her is, "I want you to tell Al. I want you to pass on this message." So he's using her as a messenger for Al. Obviously the tension is there where you feel she could die. And one touch I liked was the group like scrambling around to find some music type thing to like try and get Nancy out of it. There's a funny bit where Eddie like screams back at, I can't remember if it's Max or Robin, but this is proper music type thing. So they obviously question his choice. But yeah, Nancy comes out of it, and Steve's right there, which is perfect. Talia Dyer and her reactions to all this, and just her freaked out eyes, the facial expressions. It's so well done, and I like the scene that kind of follows on from this, like after the credits, is them getting together as a group discussing these things. Nancy says, "He showed me all this. He showed me what was going to happen to Hawkins. He showed me what was going to happen to my family and everyone else." Steve sort of tries to reassure her, says, "But surely he just did that to like scare you," type thing. But then obviously they start talking about this series of murders. There's a nice sort of connected type moment between her and Max, where they obviously realise then he's using the murders and he intends to complete the 4th murder, and they come up with this idea, then 4 murders would mean the end of the world, and there's already been 3, so the 4th one would mark the end of the world. And they sort of come up with this idea, this nice little moment where they use the chiming of the clock, which we knew was probably going to work its way into it, but they realise, I think it's Max mentions it, that there's 4 chimes of the clock in these visions. So that obviously is crucial, that then it's going to be 4 victims potentially. So they work out then, if there's another victim, if there's one more victim, then that's basically the end of the world. And then he's slowly cracking away at the world, which is something which Brenna reinforces later on when he's telling all this to Elle. Then slowly, as victims are taken by Vecna, like cracks appear in the world. Like he uses like this metaphor with a pen to do with like a sort of like a dam type breaking, and that's what Vecna's doing. So there's some great group work with them in this episode. First victim was taken, which was Cassie, because that makes the most sense. Max says she's willing to put herself out there to be almost bait so that they can like draw her out. And once again, Lucas is very concerned. There's some good stuff, some nice moments with Max and Lucas in this episode. Like there's a nice scene when they're discussing all this later on. She can draw him out to the light sort of thing. Survived, but he went after her. The Max still has the senses, so she can still sense where he's going to be, and she can use that. And you know, she takes away the Kate Bush, as she puts it, my happiest memories to overcome him, to like shut him out. And there's a little bit of like charming banter where Lucas like, does that happen to involve me? And Max, you know, blushes, says, very presumptuous of you, but yes, it does. and then I like the follow-up line from Lucas, go up in the air, I'm bringing Kate Bush out, deal. And she says, deal. So it's a very nice stuff. There's been some sweet moments with Max and Lucas in the back half of this season as they've come back together to work out, because they need some weapons, and good old Eddie tells them about a place which is called the War Zone, and one of them has this concern about going to this place and there being really angry hicks there, and Erica has one of the lines of the episode, definitely for her, it's like, if you want to avoid angry hicks, why go to a place called Warzone? Which is a great point, I have to say, and great line by Erica. They insist that they have to do it. Wondered about this sequence, because obviously they're playing on this, you know, southern, like, and their love for guns, and how, you know, kind of extreme it is, because you've got this you know, this retail outlet with all these different weapons. And it makes me wonder if it's just a coincidence, or if maybe they sort of had this idea to try and tie it into real events. The fact that there was obviously a delay, and we've had volume 2. You know, I don't like the recent stuff. Certainly, sadly, there's been issues in America with this stuff for a while, and I guess what's striking about the stuff in this episode is then this is back in the 80s, and, you know, it still seemed to be the culture back then. And there's one or two, like, sort of uneasy moments, because I think when they first go in the store, like, Erica has this sort of, like, little comment about, yes, that's can we please get our stuff and go. And I don't know if that was maybe a commentary on her being like a person of colour, you know, in this sort of, you know, part of America and that sort of town. I think it could have been because she was a bit edgy. The Adaya, where she bumps into Jason, it's like talking to her, starting to question her, and I think it's a tense scene from the start. He says the wrong thing, it could potentially turn, because she covers her track, but like when he sort of questions what she's doing in a place like this, where she sort of just says, you know, scary times, and that seems to work up to a point. But then he starts pressing her more, asks if her brother's with her, Mike. She says no, and he then starts turning the subject to, well, he's in that Hellfire Club, isn't he? And she's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And you can just see the tone of the scene changing as he's like closer to her, and I think he grabs hold of her arm at one point. And again, the reactions and the facial expressions are like really effective, but she eventually just, it's like, get your hands off me. And it's a very like strong response, powerful moment. And one of the things we've enjoyed, or a lot of people have enjoyed with Nancy in this series over the course of it, is the moment where she like turns from being the sort of sweet, type Nancy goody type character into someone a lot more like tough and vicious, and you don't mess with her. And I think that's one of those moments, just that reply like get your hands off me, get away from me sort of thing, because you just know then that sort of told Jason, don't mess with me. And then we see them sort of scattering out the store, this camper van. And one moment I really like is then there's a call back to Max or Myers mask she had in the Halloween episode in season 2, because Eddie's like looking for a mask that he can like sneak away. He builds really nicely to them going back to Vecna's house and them sort of loading up, and there's a scene where they're all like training and getting the guns, getting the different weapons. A bit more Stancy in like the Winnebago before that, where like Steve's talking about like his fantasy about driving the kid, like the family down to that in like a camper van like that, and he talks about having 6 kids, and Nancy sort of like, really 6? And I think he was talking about like this ideal fantasy he had when they were together originally, and that's sort of like, she's like, oh really? But she says apart from that, everything else seems sweet. Steve's consoling Robin because there's a thing where she actually sees her crush in weapons store, like Molly Ringwald, by the way, but like sees the crush with this other guy, so she's a bit upset. But there's this great moment with her and Steve where she just reasons, and hey, my love life in the grand scheme of things is very low down the list of like priorities. So, and he agrees, and he's saying, do you really think this is a good idea? And like Robin looks over at the rest of them, looks at like Lucas and Erica like playing. You've got like Dustin and Eddie like playing with each other, like sparring, which is really funny. But Robin just has this great line of our minds, but we've got to try it at least. And I just like that it's this line as she's looking over and they're all playing, and it sort of looks very like post-apocalyptic Mad Max style, the way they're all dressed. Or I think just the fact that they're in this camper van and they're going to battle basically sort of gives you that impression. Else stuff as well, because Brenna, as I said, explained to her the whole plan. If Henry leave the nails ready, Max group are discussing what to do. She actually sees it for her like teleporting to save her friends, because when Brenna tells her then there's only one more kill needed to like end the world, and that it's going to be in Hawkins, that her friends are in danger. Elle wants to leave, but Brenna says, no, you can't leave. It's not safe. Your friend's not ready, and you're not ready. And Owens is like more the good cop style character in this episode, as always, and he's standing up for Elle and saying, if she wants to go, she should be allowed to go. I think she's ready. And him and Elle are trying to paint the picture that she's taken out Henry once, so she can probably do it again. And what this whole thing does is it brings into question if Brenna can really be trusted, or if he has had like her best interest at heart the whole time. This is brought into question later on in a very dramatic scene with him and Al, because Al starts questioning, first of all, because there's this line about being in the dark and walking through shadows that he said about Henry, which is connected to Al's whole mind porting thing, and why exactly that started happening. I wanted to teach you, I wanted to help you. Terry finally show up, now basically has her powers back, because she sort of has this moment where she lifts up the big Nina thing, and that confirms that she's got her powers back. But Brenna's obviously desperate that she still stays there, because when the military burst in and go after Owens, he's in the other room with Al, and he's saying, you can't go in that other room, you can't try to save him, because they'll kill him and it'll ruin everything, you won't find your way back. And there's this whole drama, and one of the scenes of the episode is definitely the conflict, the dispute between him and Al. And at times, Brenna does come off as very heelish, but there's a moment where Al has made up her mind, and she's essentially saying, you caused all this, you caused what happened with Henry, you caused the whole thing in Hawkins with the upside down, you're on Al's side, although it's not quite as simple as that, because there are certain things where you can see how Brenna did have her, in his own way, I think, had her best intentions at heart. And the same with the other kids, he pleads that no, he tried to do the best by Henry, he wanted to help him, but things just got out of hand up to the point. I think you can obviously question his methods, but occasion for Al, then she obviously wasn't the one to blame. She came here with a bit of guilt, thinking she might have been the one to blame. But she's come away, and she has this line where she says, you're the monster. I thought I was the monster, but you're the monster. But things take another turn, because she tries to escape, and she says, I'm going through that door to help him, and if you try to stop me, I'm going to kill you. And in the next instant, he gives her a jab in the neck, he injects her with something, and she does fight back. She uses her powers, and he has this line about, one day you'll see the truth. But the thing is enough to knock her out, escape anyway, because the military are coming in, full lock, stock and barrel, and blasting through the place. So a little too chaotic. If I'm having certain small complaints with the episode, this might be a slight complaint, where it's maybe getting a bit too chaotic in this scene. But anyway, Owens is doing his thing. He's being a good guy once again, where he's trying not to give up any information about Al. And he even tries to bargain with the military guy, where he says, if I've got this thing where I can knock her out, it's a button and knock her out. And he tries to reason, then that way we can see if there's any more killings. And if there's no more killings during that time, chances are then Al's innocent, and I can continue my thing here with her. But obviously, as you could imagine, they don't go for that, and they intend to kill her anyway. The helicopter up above them, and this is where the plot sort of collides with the whole Mike plot as well. But because they find their way there, shooting at Brenna, I think they get him in the neck, or not the neck, in the arm or the leg, that takes him down. And it just cuts a bit between the two, and at one point the van with Jonathan and Cohen causes a distraction. At that moment, uses her powers, and it's almost like the big, she's back type moment, where she overpowers the helicopter and eventually crashes it. And it's this big emotional farewell between her and Brenna, because she gets to say goodbye, and it's sort of this poignant, bittersweet type moment, because he's dying in front of her, and he gets to say, then I'm so proud of you, 11, and certain words like fatherly type words out for her, always wanted the best for her, and he just wants her to know that. Really, it's quite a humane type moment, even in this character who sometimes hasn't seen like the most human. A nice little moment exchange between them, and she says goodbye, Papa. Relationship and how it's developed this season is very interesting. They have shown different sides to Brenna, like a more, if you said back in season 1, then this character would now seem at least a bit more sympathetic, a bit more human, then I think you would have been, okay, that's crazy. I mean, how could he be? Elle's reunited with Mike and the gang. There is a funny Argyle moment, actually, which is when he's still like stoned, basically, and Will, and I think it's Will, says, how can he still be stoned? But there is this funny thing with him where he's looking for they're looking obviously for Nina, and he's saying things like, have you ever considered that Nina could just be a really small girl? So in his like stoned state, he's looking for like a small girl. It's just so, it is actually pretty funny. Like, as much as Argyle annoys me, there have been like at least a couple of moments that have made me chuckle, and I think it's just that thing of once he bedded into the group and becomes more of part of the group rather than just kind of, he's trying to steal the scene with his quote-unquote comedy, then I think he's a bit easier to take. Often uses a map, and that's when they realise the military are on their way because they see the tracks. And another favourite scene in this episode is a scene with Mike and Will in the van, because Will assures Mike that, because Mike has this thing where he's worried about the now doesn't want to be a part of his life anymore. And first of all, Will reassures Mike then, things are going to be good. We are going to get Elle back, and you guys are going to be back together. Hour to seem for Will, because just seeing where he's come from this season, of a point where he again seemed a bit, too jealous and upset at like the whole thing with Mike and Elle, and feeling that Mike had neglected him, to this where he's saying really encouraging things and being positive, still loves Mike, and how she misses him because he shows him like a drawing which Al got him to do, so almost proving that she misses him and wants to be with him. And I do enjoy Mike's line, actually, fun like that when I discovered her in the woods, like, will she just discover that it's all a bit of a fluke and that I'm not good enough for her? And he has this line about Lois Lane where, well, at least Lois Lane was like a crack reporter, and that's a nice tie-in, because they've obviously brought up this idea of superheroes earlier in the season, so this idea that now is like a superhero, and I think that's really good stuff, where they're exploring some of the ideas of Elle having these powers and her being like extraordinary. And because I think one of the themes of the season is can Elle be just a human being, like a regular person, or will she always be hindered by her powers and where she's come from? Like, is that too difficult for her to adapt to human life? And on the flip side of that, I think there's a question of, can people around her learn to live and be normal around her type thing, which is almost what Mike is questioning. Well, also can he measure up? So, but it's a great character moment for Will, the way he's there for Mike and reinforces it. But also very interesting is then Will looks away after he's given this speech to Mike, and he actually starts crying, and Jonathan's in the front seat, and he looks back, or he sees Will crying in the windscreen. And there's always been this thing about, Will maybe being gay, and there's obviously been hints this season then he might even have feelings for Mike, and I sort of think that this scene might confirm that, because him actually like crying to himself afterwards could be an indication of that Mike further towards Elle sort of thing. And I guess it's just something for a tough thing for someone with a crush to say, assuming that's like the reading on it. It could have just been an emotional like scene, but I think because he had that reaction where he actually then cried to himself, I think we are meant to assume that there's probably something to that. But I also like how subtle it is, and Jonathan noticing, so maybe Jonathan knows something too, which would make sense with Will being his brother. So you get a whole emotional reuniting later on. I was saying we've got to get to Hawkins, and we've got to get to Hawkins tonight, and Jonathan's like, well, that's like thousands of miles, and she says, well, we've got to do it, otherwise they're gonna die. And obviously the Will Mike group don't know who they're talking about. And then it cuts to the Nancy tribe as they go into the house, and that's the way the episode ends, which is all very nicely connected. Stuff in Russia to talk about, really. And once again, even though it's like sort of like the B plot, basically a bit alongside the Mike plot, it's very solid and enjoyable to watch. And Hopper, which the fans have been waiting for, where like Joyce sort of catches him up on things in Hawkins, and there's a good line from her actually about her and Murray being like Starsky and Hutch, which is a great reference, and I can totally see that. That's so good from Joyce. Obviously, there's a struggle for them to escape this base. Dogs can actually climb up the wall, so they're coming towards them, and they escape into this lab. And Russians have been like experimenting with them in this lab, the creatures. And I really enjoy how they escape in the end, because they escape through the sewer system. Like, we just see them come up from the sewers like later on. So the idea is that they've been travelling for like probably maybe hours through the sewage, because it's a really long line. And even then they have to like burst through the guards. Like, Murray has a blast. Murray is on good form in this episode, where he's screaming and he comes crashing through the gates in the van with them all. And I mean, Dimitrov, who's with them, he reminds them that we've still got a long way to go. They're not going to let us get out of the country that easily. And that's the next big thing, is figuring how to get back to America. And I'll say this for Lurie, he's as slimy as he is, he's still entertaining, because he gets quite crooked again in this episode, where he goes back to like the old Yuri, where he's like trying to get them to negotiate, but for some water and for like a hot steaming bath. Dimitrov actually, because he's obviously had his fill with Lurie. He's pissed. He's just like, you're stringing us along again. Helicopter. I mean, once again, he's bullshitted them, because he's given them the impression that then it was going to be a plane and they can fly back to, but it's actually a helicopter. And it's a helicopter which he is named after his first love, which is so funny. And he's getting all like lovey-dovey and romantic and insists, and hey, this will get you there, which obviously they're not buying. But this idea to try and phone Owens. Joyce has the idea, but as it turns out, like, they have to do it Colette. They have to do it for an operator. So Dimitrov makes the call, and he says that to them after the call, when he's spoken to the operator, then that, the operator then has to try and patch them through, and he says it could be minutes, it could be hours, whatever, it's hard to know. But then even if you get patched through, then chances are the phone will be bugged by the KGB, so we've got to talk in code. And he just has this line about welcome to Soviet Russia, so it's this really cynical sort of line at the end of the scene. Papa, which obviously has a very emotional climax with the Brenna character and with 11, and them finally having their big emotional standoff and sort of poignant goodbye. So let me know what you thought of the episode and some of the stuff we saw. Some of the stuff I brought up, what do you think of that Will scene? How do you read that? How do you read the Brenna and 11 stuff? I'll be back tomorrow with my final review of the season, so keep watching Stranger Things, like and subscribe as always, share me out on social media. You can support the channel on Patreon, patreon.com/borednow for some extra perks and content. So just $1 a month if you want to do that, or you could just make a one-off donation at PayPal. The PayPal link is on the channel. But thanks for listening, and I'll be back with more Stranger Things soon. Goodbye.